All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending this session. Please welcome Stephen Phillips from Theia Interactive. He will be presenting how he's using Substance to create VR and AR experience for architecture and design. Here we go.
Thank you. Thank you. Like Pierre said, my name is Stephen Phillips. I'm co-founder and CTO of Theia Interactive. And Theia Interactive is a Northern California company specializing in virtual reality and augmented reality visualizations and experiences, mostly for architecture and getting a lot more projects for design and manufacturing in general, as well as creative and marketing jobs. So we are essentially a creative studio doing a lot of varied work. And this presentation is mostly about some recent projects that we've had that focused heavily on Substance products to showcase beautiful graphics, and also a little bit about just our company and how our story and size really fits into the Substance narrative. So to start off, this is our latest show reel, just showing off a lot of our most recent projects over the last couple of years. This is our client Mohawk Group, the world's largest manufacturer of flooring. They've been using us for a lot of virtual reality showroom experiences that they have across dozens of their own showrooms in the United States. For example, this one was the lichen forest for a new product that they launched. That was this lichen-colored carpet tile, and they won awards for that at NeoCon, the largest design conference of the year. We do a lot of interactivity for our clients, like switching materiality, maneuvering objects, changing out different times of day. This is an airport experience actually for Suffolk Construction, so they could see what their in-progress construction phasing was going to look like and how it would impact the end user seeing these different walls being put up. This is a speakeasy being built in Wisconsin. This was almost entirely Substance. There were tons of very weird fabrics that they were trying to get us to use. And this one I'll be going into a lot more detail on. Harley Davidson Augmented Reality experience, done entirely with Substance Painter. It's gotten us a lot of great press and really showcases what you can do with an iPad mobile device and still be AAA incredible enterprise quality. Virtual reality construction phasing again, but this time with a virtual safety inspection where you can check out different types of safety netting. Interactive operating room where every piece is movable. Just lots and lots of different things that we cover here. That didn't even go into some of the augmented reality labels that we do. So about the company, Theia Interactive was founded back in 2014. So for the last 4 years, we've been slowly growing and have gone from just 4 co-founders to 20 people doing really incredible projects with a lot of amazing technology partners like Unreal Engine and now Algorithmic and NVIDIA and HTC. Really learning how to showcase these amazing products with a young company. We've got about 8 artists on staff who would more or less be in touch with Substance Designer or with 3D modeling and working with the Unreal Engine scenes. And this really comes into play with my story about our growth. Because 4 years ago, when we were starting with nothing and with no clients and with hardly any experience, almost every single employee comes from our local university that has a game design department. So we used to have 1 project at a time and sometimes 0 project at a time, and the clients didn't know what they wanted because the technology of mobile apps or virtual reality applications was really new, and so there's just lots of wasted time and figuring things out on our end. But these days, we sometimes have more projects than we have employees, and the deadlines get shorter and shorter and shorter, and the client requests get more and more intense, and because we can actually start delivering products faster because we know what we're doing, then it just worsens the situation, but makes really great products for us in the end. We used to do everything exclusively in Photoshop. Coming out of a game design department, they usually like to start with the foundational fundamentals of how you're supposed to make your textures. So that way you learn what not to do and you can learn the tools to improve that stuff later. So because a lot of us were young coming out of this university program, that's what we were used to doing. And in the first couple years of going back to the university program and finding interns and hiring our first employees, I'd often get people saying, "Oh, do you guys use Substance Painter?" Because that was basically brand new back when I was leaving college in 2013, 2014. And we were like, no, we don't use that sort of stuff because a lot of our textures for these architectural things are really boring and plain and heavily repeated, so we don't use interesting software to make it. Well, that's, after a couple projects and a couple years, you realize how stupid that was. We really needed to be transitioning over to the Substance suite because it's just not sustainable to do things in that kind of old handcrafted way. So Substance Designer and then using that stuff in other products like Painter gives us a lot more flexibility, a lot more reusability. I just had a conversation with one employee who was like, oh yeah, you remember that time with that one casino project where I had like 30 marbles to make? Like you can't just make 30 marbles in Photoshop the same way you can make 30 marble variations in Substance Designer, right? And so those are the sorts of scaling problems that you get as you become a more successful company or have clients who have higher demands for you. And of course, if your employees know what they're doing, generating these sorts of textures are just super, super fast. And of course, the end product is better. And this would click, OK. So at one point when we had our first 8 or so employees, I don't think we were using any algorithmic products. I kind of mentioned the reason being for that, but we kind of knew it was the next step that we really needed to tackle to take our projects to the next level, to impress people, to make our lives easier. But it's hard to just go from no substance to substance overnight. So what we found, and we transitioned it pretty smartly, was in our business, when you do visualizations for clients, there's peak periods like last week before a conference, and then there's some trough periods where there's not that much to do. So whenever an employee was in between tasks, in between projects, and said, hey, what do I work on next? What we did was, hey, go to the Substance Academy, watch a bunch of YouTube videos, learn how to make a basic rock so that next project or the project after that, you can start doing that. And I remember one of our employees said, Stephen, I can make this texture in Photoshop in 5 minutes, or I can spend 5 hours learning Substance Designer to do the same thing. But that's a really short-term problem that you're having, and so by putting in that effort into learning those sorts of tools, it's a really good long-term investment. And so now we have some employees who are advanced with Substance Designer and just go all out for things that even I would say, dude, just like get it offline or something. And then there's some employees who still spend a lot of time tinkering with it, and I have to like say, hey, let's hurry this up, or pass it off to so and so who knows what they're doing, because we still have deadlines. But having that balance and having people always in the pipeline who are learning these tools is really invaluable. And a year or two later, definitely no regrets there. Another thing was revisiting old work. I do recommend this, especially for people looking for a job or who like doing stuff in their part-time, during night hours, is take all of your old projects, your old textures, your old materials, and just start recreating them in Substance, because they're always going to get better. Even if you made it all in something procedural, you're always going to learn those new nodes or learn those new techniques, or have gone through a certain course where you can go back and just try it again a different method. And it doesn't matter how good you are, you're going to be improving it every single time. And then what I also hinted at was hiring people who actually have a lot more Substance experience. So when I get resumes from our local university, which is a wonderful resource for us, pretty much everyone kind of has some of that experience. It's Substance Painter, and to a lesser degree, Substance Designer is taught at an introductory level of, here's a couple nodes, follow this tutorial, now you have a material. So we see a lot of those entry-level texture artists who can learn, and that's amazing. But then the people who go out on their own and learn that stuff and just go really deep into it on their own and follow their favorite artists and keep up with ArtStation on all the really insane substances that are out there these days. That's where it's really valuable to have someone come in and just show the newer employees, hey, this is how I do it. Or did you know about this node? No, because there's so many of them. How could you ever know them all? So yeah, that transition phase is still ongoing. It's kind of just a permanent thing, especially for different levels of employees, but it's a great transition nonetheless. So I'll finally get into some actual graphics here. It was kind of hard to actually dig up a lot of the substances that we make because our biggest problem with clients, and somebody has to solve it, is that they have interior designers for a new bar, And then over the course of years or months or whatever it is, they come up with a 300-page document with every single fixture, every single furniture piece, every single swatch of paint colors. And then they hand it off to us and say, here, make it. You have 3 weeks to make it, whatever it is. But a lot of the times we will get documents that started out as like a 100 by 100 pixel JPEG, and then got resaved, and then got printed out, and then written on, and then rescanned into a photocopier, and so it's just really, really useless. So like way back in the old days when we could just kind of make up materials here or there, or if we got lucky with a good client reference, we could just use a snipping tool on the PDF and drag out something, and in Photoshop make it tile. But with these days, we use things more as references and can start generating this stuff from scratch, which is really, really great. So this first example is just a pretty straightforward tile backsplash, or we had a decent reference. So this other reference here, oh, sorry, I skipped ahead. This next one, you can kind of start to see how it's not that great of an image. It's got this crazy barrel distortion. The photographer had a lot of shadows in there. It wasn't meant to be a texture. It's just literally a reference. But for an artist with simple tile generation skills, it's not too hard to turn that into a legitimate material. This is another great one. We've gotten some clients who will send us physical samples of their products. This one is, I believe, a wall covering, like floor to ceiling, huge scale, and it's all made up of geo. There are some times where we'll get a piece of fabric and we will literally throw it into the photocopy machine just to get a simple base color out of it, and it's really hacky, but it totally works. We haven't bothered with setting up legitimate scanning, light boxes for all of those different normal map generation tools and height map generation tools in Substance. I'm sure we will someday, and I really want to someday. But anyways, back to some of these simple materials, it's really straightforward to just get something that looks good. And sometimes we just get a photographic reference. Nothing from the manufacturer, no website where it originated from. It's just like somebody found something and said, yeah, we're going to find this at some point, so please make something that looks like it. This is a 3D model that we had to make based off of another design document, and this one is painted in painted in Substance Painter really quickly. I didn't get a chance to get the actual render from the scene that it was in, but it's actually like an 8-foot tall statue. It's pretty cool. The other thing that we're really starting to go deep into is Substance Source. I'm sure because you're here in this room, you've been watching how many releases they have and how many materials they have, and I have too many points to spend on all of them anyways, but we really are trying to use Substance Source way more these days, because what it does for you is sometimes it's close enough where someone will say, here's a wood, it's this specific type of exotic South African wood, and you just find something on Source and you're just like, yep, there we go, that's fine, and it's good enough for the client. And other times it really acts as a great layer, a base layer of tweaking something that is hyper precise to what you're really going for. And you don't have to generate insane graphs from scratch anymore. So this is, let's see, one simple example, a floor covering, a floor tile laminate, something that's basically made up of hexes. For a lot of people, the hex or the 3D cubes would be simple to make in Designer, but our artist found this material on Source and just edited a couple parameters, and it became that really, really quickly. So he, almost no work at all. The next project I want to cover is the Harley Davidson Augmented Reality project. Back in October of last year, Epic Games came to us and said, hey, we have this cool project, this cool data set. We have Automotive University as a goal, and we want to show off the power of the brand new AR kit capabilities that were in Unreal Engine at the time in 4.18, I believe. So they gave us a mesh from an artist named Amir Galinik, and it was 13 million triangles. It was tens of thousands of objects, plenty of materials, and then it had to run in augmented reality on an iPad at 60 frames a second, or else it was a no-go. So that's a clear problem. This is our final version that ended up in Unreal Engine, and all the renders of it here are just in Unreal Engine. This is painted entirely in Substance Painter, using a lot of straightforward techniques of baking out AO, using them for masks on certain effects, and layering some pretty straightforward materials that are, a lot of these are just already in there in some way or another inside Substance Painter. But doing it at 2K and doing it at 4K and breaking up this mesh into certain chunks allowed us to get really high levels of detail for a real-time experience. So we actually ended up combining that whole entire bike down into, let's see, 100 meshes in order to keep our draw calls down below a budget that had been given to us of like 300 draw calls or something like that. And we also had 32 unique materials. And this is a bit overkill because you could craft a completely procedural material that just reads a couple AO maps and can apply itself to anything in the world. But we wanted like this level of detail where we could go in and identify every nick and scratch and rust mark and tweak it to the extreme, because that's what we wanted good feedback on. And this is the same exact model, just with the transparency effect right in Unreal. This is the content browser, which is a little overkill. We baked everything out on this project. So it was quite a few textures, but it was just so like simple, predictable, reliable, old school stuff. And we were running on an iPad and didn't have enough time to make it in the first place. So that's what we did. Our simple Unreal material for this project was just 2 sets of texture, channel packed ambient occlusion and roughness, and normal maps, basically. And we had a slider that was contained within a material parameter collection that just shifted between the 2 different materials, which I forgot to mention. I think you can see them. So like there's the red here, because that's actually the finished like hot rod cleaned up Harley Davidson motorcycle. And the other version, which I like showing off more, is this dirty, grungy, what's called a barn find. And so it was requested that within the app you can actually switch between those 2 materials. Right at the time, Unreal just released a bent normal feature inside the material editor, which turned out to be the most amazing thing ever, basically. If you are ever making any shiny objects with occlusion or tight spaces or cylindrical surfaces or bright reflections, you really have to look into it. So the first one here is just movable lighting, really flat looking. The AO adds depth, and then you can kind of see that the bent normals that we baked out for each section of it emphasizes the AO that is there. In this image, it kind of appears overkill, but the reason I'm explaining it now is because it works even better in the next image. But if you see at the bottom of the right-hand screenshot, there's just one little node that says bent normal. And Substance makes it super, super, super easy to bake that out in the designer. Otherwise, you're going to have to kind of set things up inside your 3D modeling software, and really we like to just keep it all in one place. So this is an animation of the bike exploding. This was a request. This does work on the iPad in real time at 60 frames a second. And you can look at every single piece of that, which is kind of the whole point of the story of super high resolution models and super interactive augmented reality, where you literally can go up and see every single nut and bolt. We took out the screw threads because the guy who made it had threads on every single screw that was in there. That was our cheat. But in this animation, what I would like to explain is with the AO map that is baked onto everything when it's together, we actually just weaken that and do a linear interpolation between there being AO and there being not AO. And so this setup has no dynamic lights hitting the object and has no static shadows baked onto the object. It's all just the ambient indirect lighting cache that Unreal has made, and all the depth of like things actually occluding each other as they get there is just the most straightforward AO bake ever, and we just change it with the sequencer. This is the finished product running on an iPad. You saw it in the video, and it's mostly repetitive in the next video. We took it to Autodesk University, and Unreal had a little booth there with a big table about the size of a motorcycle, like 3 feet off the ground. Had little stickers everywhere to help with the augmented reality tracking. And then we had the iPads, and we were just walking around going like this. And if you guys, I don't know if you've seen other people's augmented reality demos or if you plan on making your own augmented reality demos, but when you see an empty table with nothing on it, everyone just walks right past it. So you have to go like this and stand around and like pretend like there's something really interesting there, and then people start looking as they go by and say like, what was that? And we've done a lot of I'm pretty sure I've personally done thousands of virtual reality demos. We go to trade shows all the time. We go to client meetings all the time. We've been doing that since DK2. And people get excited about VR. It's like, whoa, that's so cool. But the AR, there's just something different about it where they don't have a big piece of plastic on their head. They don't have to mess up their hair. They can take the iPad and just walk around, and they can put that motorcycle down the hallway or on the table or in front of their friend's face, and people pose in front of it and go like this, like they're writing it away. Made it a really, really fun experience for that conference. And whenever we go to other conferences now that we don't have a booth at, we just walk around with the iPad and say, hey, have you seen this? And they go, oh my gosh, a motorcycle. And some people really like motorcycles. Oh, and it's a 1937 UL. I think it's like a flathead or something. I don't know enough. A couple more screenshots that we just did on the spot for promotional purposes. Let's see, so the reflections on the bike, we actually captured at the conference. We brought a little 360 camera, captured the scene, and then just put it back in Unreal Engine, put it in reflection capture, and reshipped it. So you could actually walk up to the bike, and like this hallway example wouldn't work because it wasn't pre-planned, but the one area where the bike was meant to be on the table, it had real life reflections, which was really fascinating. And this is just another fly through the same thing, transitioning between materials, getting super high-res imagery. Unreal Engine and this real-time technology is great for tons of renders and tons of interactivity. And as you'll see at the end of this, it wasn't just an augmented reality project, it was also a virtual reality project. So that with an iPad or with a headset, you can just get down and analyze every single piece of this thing. So I kind of mentioned that our next frontier for getting more serious about substances is source. And I'm sure you've been watching the most recent Automotive packs coming out with really ridiculous car paints and entire knobs and speed dials and everything that are super customizable. And certain things like, I said earlier, don't reinvent the wheel when it comes to materials. And Allegorithmic literally reinvents wheels for this Automotive pack so that you don't have to. They have this project called the X-Town, this car designed by Takumi Yamamoto, a famous car designer. And Substance has been wanting something that they own that they can show off all these amazing materials in with interiors and exteriors and do a lot of customizability and sweet features. So they had someone actually model it in Alias, and it eventually came out into 3ds Max. And we got these files, and we got the Automotive material packs, and we've been tasked with creating real-time experiences with the car. So we're super excited to be working on this. This is rendered in Unreal Engine. It's amazing for photography and for 4K renders and for everything else that makes something super sexy to retweet on Twitter. But also, it's a really engaging experience to be able to see something so beautiful in 3D. Here's just a simple fly-through. It is fully customizable in real time with every single substance parameter for how they made the materials. So there will be color, there will be different rims being generated on the fly through just texture parameters. Lots of other fun stuff. And of course, the environment was all substance-based as well. And so this is a VR experience that is actually available this week if you want to go by the Star VR booth, which is conveniently located across from the Allegorithmic booth. You can put on their super wide field of view headset and get to see this stuff in person. And the wide field of view, if you guys have done VR quite a bit, you've probably had that kind of tunnel vision of like, yeah, I can see some stuff in front of me. But with something like Star VR, you have your full entire periphery. So when you have an expansive environment or you have a really close-up model, you can see so much more of it. Which is why in the straight-up monitor view, there's 4 different splits of it being rendered, because that's how many times you have to reproject it just to hit all those angles. So definitely an exciting project for virtual reality, and we hope to take it further with other methods of engagement in the future. It's kind of just a sandbox project for Allegorithmic and us to make something pretty awesome. Oops, I went backwards. So there's definitely more to come. So that's our story. It's in summary, it's about how a small studio like us with a handful of people and really organic growth can take all the hard work of another company like Algorithmic and use it to really accelerate our own workflow for getting projects out the door. We have projects with 2-day turnarounds, which we don't like to do, but we do them. We have projects with 6 weeks of turnaround with 100 materials to make out of it. And you know, a lot of our cost, a lot of our time and effort is all in that manual labor of crafting these materials and making sure they work well in the scene and getting client approval. And of course, having all of that stuff, procedural, dynamic, easily viewable on the web, et cetera, has really improved our lives. And we're looking to transition more into that with cooler projects, both for architecture, where it covers the basics like a red brick or a painted wall or something else, and into manufacturing, where it gets intense with these super custom signature materials that Algorithmic are putting out there. So that's our story. Thanks for listening. I know I ended very short because I talked fast like I thought I would. So if you guys have any questions, please ask me in general about the business and designing stuff for VR, AR, or some of these specific texture things. I'm not the guy to go to for real designer questions, but I'll try to answer them. Thanks. Yeah.
Hey, so I have 2 questions. The first one is, we work with a lot of vehicles at my company, and we currently are not using Substance, but it's something that we would like to implement. How is like the clear coat and the speckle on the paint for the cars?
So this car project, which actually only started 2 weeks ago, was our first run at trying out those clear coat and speckle things within Unreal Engine, getting that translation from source into Unreal Engine. And I'll have to verify with the team if there's a better way to do it, but essentially you just take those same exact texture maps and you can pipe them into an Unreal material. So it's not exactly drag and drop where a Substance, actually, well, we had our hands tied because we were using 419. I believe 420 Unreal handles MDL files, which could do that better. But it was simple just to make a clear coat parameter with no inputs at all, and it just works on Unreal. So
Nice.
pretty easy.
So second part of my question, we are a small company and we are currently experiencing a lot of growth. And how do you balance, so we are currently hiring, but how do you balance either saying no to projects versus hiring contractors to cover you saying yes to projects that you may not have the bandwidth for?
Right. Well, if you take our approach, you just never say no, and you don't sleep. But it's not always recommended.
That's what we're currently doing, so.
Yeah, I know. I feel your pain. That's something we're trying to explore ourselves, because sometimes people come along with what's like a straightforward project, and it turns out to not be straightforward. And you know, it's rough to just be in that. We just always tell ourselves that it's growing pains, because it's what every company has to go through. Because there's a point at which all of your employees are doing overtime, and just before they burn out, you hire someone else to relieve them, and they just keep doing that, and it, you know, it's painful. So the best thing is to try to identify or try to market yourself as the luxury goods provider, where you can do it for more money for fewer projects, and then it works out the same way. But that's just a magical solution. So it's pretty unique to everyone's business, I think.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
Hello. I am currently also working at a ArcViz studio, and mainly for the longest time, our company has been mainly focusing on just like V-Ray still renders of homes for like brochure input inserts in Max. And we're just kind of starting to get into like the VR aspect in Unreal. Yeah. And a tool we've been like using heavily for importing our objects and textures is Datasmith. Does your company rely at all on that plugin? I was just curious because we've seen like some of your projects and they're pretty crazy. But yeah.
Yeah, are they crazy in that the original designs were like incredible, or that things don't turn out how they should with the import? Which type of crazy?
No, I was just saying like your stuff is crazy.
Yeah.
Like it's good. Like
oh, thank you. Sorry, I misunderstood. Thank you. Awesome. So we use Datasmith quite frequently at the beginning of almost every project. More and more clients come to us with 3D files, either in Max or in SketchUp, and they say, hey, you can Datasmith this. Here you go. We say, OK, yeah, thanks. Try not to oversimplify it, because it's still a lot of work. So we use that like every day. It's got more and more support for Python and other scripting things and other software packages so that you can get even more work in there and do it fine-tuned to your methods. So yes, we use it a lot. We like it. It is pretty invaluable because we were doing stuff the old-fashioned way for a really long time, where someone would give us a crazy Revit model and someone would painstakingly, for more than 100 hours, select groups of meshes and export them to be more efficient, because we picked VR and AR to be our platforms, the things that cost the most to render and get out there. So it's a challenge no matter what, even with cool tools like Datasmith. But yeah, we use it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, hello. It was just to, I just had a question about where you had the exploding parts on the bike. Was that procedurally generated, or is that manually positioned for the exploded parts?
That one was manually done because we knew exactly how to do it. It was just a sequencer with 30 pieces, a beginning keyframe and an end keyframe. It was super easy. There are examples out there, and I can't really say, but stuff is being more available for that to just be drag and drop procedural. I've seen that done, and it is something that's going to be pretty easily distributed for having any group of objects, and they know where each other are and space themselves out. So I've seen it, but for that project, like all tech demos, we just make it work however we can, and that's what we have.
And just to confirm, did you say that you'd pre-baked the ambient occlusion both as the parts together assembled and apart, and then you transition between the two, or did I misinterpret that?
For that piece that I was talking about, there was only one AO map, and it was just turned on or turned off.
Okay.
I believe we baked everything together.
And then you just dial it out as they...
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
So in VR, are you using any displacement? I know that from my experience, normal map, it looks a little flat when you're kind of looking, when you're changing perspectives. Yeah,
you're right. Normal maps they still do their job. You can't get rid of them. They also really, really help with reflections and changing those. Displacement maps, we don't typically do a lot of. We're starting to try it out more because it can make a big difference. The two problems that we have with it is you need geometry for that, and for a typical architectural project, you already have a geometry problem, so you have to do a lot of handcrafting to make sure it's not too big of a deal. If you dynamically change the resolution of a mesh in order to get the displacement to work out in VR, the slightest head tweak has changed your screen percentage so much that things flicker and warp a lot. What we are also playing with is parallax occlusion mapping. Have you done that one? Unreal, as of like a year ago, has just a node for parallax occlusion mapping where it goes beyond displacement. There's no geo. It's just a pure material displacement. Really fascinating stuff. Also, apparently, like the most expensive thing you could ever do to your shader for the pixels. And the problem with the pixel shader is that in VR, you have more and more and more pixels to render. That one is definitely worth looking into. On the Harley scene, it's the garage, the bricks in it were very, very flat, and we got bad feedback of like, it looks like a brick wallpaper. So very simple, as low cost as we could, parallax occlusion mapped thing made it so that you could walk up to the wall and see the interior mortar lines even though they weren't there, which is cool.
And one more question. Color matching, are you tasked with matching exact colors by any of your firms, and how do you do that?
We are kind of lucky in that no one holds us accountable for like really photometric things and really precise things, because we can eyedropper any image, but that's not the base color that it really is. So it's really hard for us to just know those things ahead of time for what makes a super correct material. We end up eyeballing stuff a lot. We try to eyeball it in the scene, but also in the material editor, and also in Painter or a Substance designer itself, and try to make sure that we're not just missing something. But yeah, we just kind of cheat within a certain realm of it being okay.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. I see.
Hi, you mentioned you were putting together a scanner, or were thinking about it. I'm kind of I'm in a firm and we have a big library and we like to do something like that. So I was wondering if you learned anything about the process, how you're approaching it for a material scanner, basically.
We haven't done it hands-on. We haven't had a material that was so important to get right, and it also physically existed. Those are kind of our main options, because either we get a JPEG photo or we get a 3-inch section of it that's not worth scanning for a lot of reasons. But Substance has a lot of great articles on it. They even have this really cool one where, I forget who the author was. They just made this jerry-rigged contraption with a paper towel tube and a shoebox where they had light coming from certain directions, and therefore they could have those inputs into Substance, and it was pretty straightforward. You can probably find like between $15 and $50, just some light boxes and some LED lights to set it up for a really amateur solution.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah. I'm going to let you guys, if we're calling it quits, if you have any more questions, I'll definitely be around here and networking and mixing. And thanks so much for coming out and listening to this.